G'day everyone, and welcome again to this Hidden Gems ShareCafe webinar series. We have a massive audience online today. It is a new world record for us, so we appreciate your Friday lunchtime. Now, for those of you who don't know ShareCafe and are with us for the first time, the website's been around for about 20 years and is overdue for a makeover, but is now owned by experienced investment professionals. And our objective is to bring investors up the curve with curated investment and research content that is intelligent, informative, and digital at its core. We think there's a very large gap between the AFR and the hot coppers of the world, and in between sits far too many promotional websites that have more interest in pumping whatever company's paying them. Our aim isn't to simply rehash ASX announcements. That's not our game. Ultimately, we don't want to see investors lose money because they haven't been informed. We saw it in 87, 99, and the GFC. So if you do receive our newsletter for the first time, take the time to look at our content as we look globally for changing trends, get updates from our research analysts. We interview CEOs and board members and also industry experts to produce ultimately content that will create a more informed investor. Now, we're happy if you want to reach out to us. Send us an email asking for whatever company you want on. We'll chase up for you, or any further suggestions about how we can improve things. Okay, enough from me. Let's make a start. Don't forget to ask questions. Type them in the Q&A box provided. First up, we have Race Oncology, ASX code RAC, market cap of 558 million, and a one-year return of up 1,100%. The company is a precision oncology company with a phase 2/3 cancer drug called Bisanterine. The drug is a potent small molecular inhibitor of the fat mass and obesity-associated FTO protein. Let's hope I got that out right, Daniel. We have with us Daniel Tillett, the Chief Scientific Officer and Executive Director. We welcome you back, Daniel. Over to you.
Thank you, Tim. For those of you who are new to the story of race, or those of you who know the old story of race, it's a good idea to start again afresh. So many people I've spoken to over the years have known the old race, and we now currently have what I would consider the new race. Basically, almost everything about the company has changed in the last couple of years, and including the share price. Next slide, please. This gives you an overview of the company. We have approximately 143 million shares on issue, a little under 26 million options. Of those, 7 million bonus options we issued to the shareholders on a 1-for-20 basis around a month ago. Share price, as of yesterday, close was at 3.89. When I spoke last year around December, it was around $2. We've had quite an amazing run in the share price over that time. The current market cap is around $560 million. We have about $12 million in the bank. And we have a number of significant shareholders, not least myself. I own a little under 10%, and on a fully diluted basis, a little over 10%. Next slide, please. Before I talk to you about FTO and Bisanterine, I'd like to give you a brief overview of cancer. One of the things that many people don't realize is there's a long gap between when the cancer was initiated and when you end up actually having a mass large enough to be detected or cause problems. That process is slow, complex, involves many different changes. But the really key point in the whole process of cancer is at the point of metastasis, which is when it can spread, and that's the point when the cancer generally acquire treatment resistance. This is a major problem. Obviously, if you have a cancer and it can be treated, you don't have a problem. If you have a cancer that's small enough to be cut out on its own, you have a benign tumor. If you have something that's once it's spread around the body and it's resistant to all treatment, that's when you have a major problem. Next slide, please. And one of the key proteins or key genes involved in driving this process, particularly the step from a treatable tumor to an uncontrolled metastatic tumor that's resistant to all treatment options, is overexpression of a protein called FTO, which stands for fat mass and obesity associated protein, or originally it stood for a gene called FATSO. It's a particular protein that lies in a critical pathway of regulation that controls which proteins a cell will produce. And from the perspective of cancer, the expression of FTO drives cancer development, treatment resistance, and metastases. And like there are many proteins that are involved in this, what makes FTO particularly interesting is that it's involved in a huge range of different cancers. And basically all the major cancers and most of the minor cancers, a subset of those cancers, a significant subset, are being driven by FTO overexpression. The interesting thing about all of this from a scientific perspective is this was something that was only discovered in the last couple of years. And this is one of the consequences of this is it's one of the hottest areas of cancer research currently going on. There's a huge amount of publications coming out on a daily basis around this whole process. I won't go into the details of how FTO works and how it fits into the whole pathway system. Just from the perspective of an investor, all you need to understand is it sits there key right in the middle of the process of cancer becoming a far more dangerous cancer. Next slide, please. This here just gives you a brief overview. On the left is an overview of all the major cancers of the body. And on the right there is all those cancers that are then involved that have FTO overexpression driving that particular, those particular cancers. So basically all the cancers that are commonly found have a subset that is being driven by this. Next slide, please. On top of this, it's been discovered that if you can inhibit FTO, in other words, switch it off, you can actually overcome resistance to or enhance the activity of other treatment options, including the checkpoint inhibitors, the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, other cancer chemotherapeutic agents like alkylating agents, and other DNA damaging agents, PARP inhibitors, hypermethylating agents, even something as different as radiotherapy. The resistance to that can be driven through FTO overexpression. So you can imagine that this is a very exciting target to go after. If you can inhibit FTO, then you can actually make, not only can you attack the cancers directly, you can overcome the resistance that cancers have developed to these other treatment options. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the next slide, which is the drug Bisanterine. And this is a drug that's been around for a long time, and many of you are aware of this as being a chemotherapeutic agent. But in practice, it's actually not really a chemotherapeutic agent. It's a very ineffective chemotherapeutic drug. You have to give almost heroic doses of the drug to get an effect. But what it has turned out to be is an extremely potent FTO inhibitor. And we've seen this historically in a large number of clinical trials. It has worked exceptionally well in a lot of different cancer types, both leukemias and solid tumors, such as breast and ovarian. And we recently saw in a small phase 2 trial we ran in Israel, a 40% response rate in a very difficult to treat patient population. So since we've discovered this drug, we've remanufactured it, we've rebuilt the patent position around that, and we have orphan drug designation for AML. Next slide, please. So FTO inhibitors, what are there out there? There is, because it's such a new area and people have only just discovered the importance of FTO literally in the last 2 years, there are very few known FTO inhibitors that are out there, and none that are really suitable to be used in the laboratory. The number one most potent drug that's been discovered has been Bisanterine. This has gone all the way through the clinical development process in the past, so we know a large amount how it behaves in humans, and it's extremely potent. And if you compare it to some of the other drugs that are out there that have just been discovered, it's not only is it very effective at very low concentrations, we also have a huge advantage in being very advanced in the clinical development process. So as I mentioned before, we've manufactured it, we've used it in a phase 2. We're about to launch into a whole series of new phase 2 trials to take this through in this particular indication. So a really exciting opportunity. Next slide, please. The team, obviously, we have a great team at Race. I won't go into detail because I haven't got the time to go into this, but next slide, please. But rest assured, we know what we're doing. So we've taken this data, which was only discovered about 12 months ago, almost to the week, about FTO and Bisanterine, and built a new strategy around targeting FTO in a couple of lead indications, melanoma and a kidney cancer called clear cell renal carcinoma. We have a whole series of programs in the laboratory, preclinical, and we have a series of clinical programs being developed around those indications. We also have historical data around breast cancer. It's very effective. It went through a phase 3 trial, and a lead sort of indication for approval is in AML, where we have 2 phase 2 trials currently underway in that indication. Next slide, please. So we've announced a large number of activities over the last 6 months. So we have positive breast cancer and ovarian cancer preclinical results. We've now got 4 new programs underway at the University of Newcastle in collaboration with them. We've appointed the discoverer of FTO's role in this pathway, Professor Chen from the City of Hope, to our scientific advisory board. And in the last couple of weeks, we've initiated an AML phase 2 trial in a particular subtype of AML called extramedullary that will be run here in Australia. And we also have initiated the process of another phase 2 trial in Israel, a larger one than the last one we ran. Next slide, please. To give you an idea of the activities that are underway or about to get underway, it lays out the sort of activity timeline. We have a lot of activity, a lot of data being generated. Because all these trials are open label, which means they're not double blinded, we don't have to wait for the end of the trial before we can report on how they're progressing. We know as they're going along. So there's a lot of news flow to be expected over the coming year, year and a half. Next slide. Just before I end, I'd like to just sort of sum up. We've got a really amazing strategy and opportunity that just fell into our laps. It's sort of the mining equivalent of tripping over the welcome stranger. We have a really nice balanced risk and reward opportunity there. We've got an amazing team committed to the shareholders, and we have a management team that has serious skin in the game. All of us have bought our shares. We really are focused entirely on achieving an outcome via either sale or licensing to a large pharma partner to take this through all the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. A couple of questions here. Why was Bisanterine ineffective as a cancer drug in its previous life?
It actually wasn't. It was actually quite effective. The reason why it got lost was the original company that owned it, called Ledley Laboratories, ran a large phase 3 trial in breast cancer, and unfortunately they messed up the dosing of that trial. So the first half of the trial was done with 1 dose, and then they realized they were using a too low a dose, and they then upped that dose, which made it ineligible for approval. You can't change things halfway through a phase 3 trial. At that point, they didn't have enough time left to re-go and rerun a new phase 3 trial in breast cancer, and so they ended up dropping it. And so it's really sad. It made it all the way to the market in France, but they decided it wasn't worthwhile continuing with just for that small indication. So yeah, a lot's changed in the cancer market in that time. So it was just bad luck, really.
And just a question here from Chris. I understand we're approaching big pharma in a strategic manner. with trials to continue next year, will those conversations likely continue as a trial unfolds in 2022?
Exactly. So because they're open label, we know how they're going. So we're able to have meaningful conversations with pharma about the drug. So while we've got a lot of data to support from a preclinical perspective, to go back in, it's using the drug in a new way. And so we need to make sure we've got that clinical data, and it changes the whole conversation you have. You know, if you've got an exciting drug that works in mice, that's great. But if you've got an exciting drug that works in humans, that's fantastic.
And you spoke briefly about the board, and we realised there's not a lot of time, but you recently had a new appointment in Dr. David Fuller. Can you tell us a little bit about his background and how he helped the company?
Yeah, he's our new CMO. He's extremely experienced in running clinical trials, designing clinical trials. He was at Syneos, which is a CRO, just till recently. So I think he's been 30 years or so in that space. So very, very experienced guy. He starts next Monday, actually. So looking forward to it. He's so excited. He's been working with us already along the way. He can't stop. Unfortunately, it's one of these things, once you get started, you start to learn about the opportunity, it's really hard not to get excited about it.
And in terms of excitement, what are kind of the catalysts and the news shareholders or new shareholders could expect moving forward?
I think the first ones will be first patient being treated, probably most likely in Israel will be first up, just purely because of the timeline. But I think the initiation of the phase 1/2 for the FTO solid tumor trial will be something that'll be towards the end of the year, will be something that'll be really exciting. Any positive signal in those indications will really drive, I think, a lot of interest, both by shareholders and outside large pharma and so forth.
Great, Daniel. That's all we have time for. We've got a number of questions coming through that are quite technical in nature, so we'll send those through to you on Monday. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tim.
Next up, we have Ordera, ASX code AUA, market cap at $12 million. The company has kindly donated 4 pairs of headphones, so we'll pick the first 4 attendees from the registration list to give those out. Now, the company only listed last month. What does the company do? It's a technology company that has developed a hearing profile algorithm used to personalise sound output to the needs of the individual. We have with us the CEO, Dr. James Fielding. James, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Tim, and pleasure to be here. I think it's important that we're new to the market. We start off with a bit of background around how we formed as a company and how we landed at the ASX, and then take you through the journey. So, as Tim said, I'm a medical doctor by trade, and during medical school was given a scholarship to do MBA studies while we completed our medical studies. The goal was to come out and address issues in the public health system. One that I've always been really passionate about is hearing. I've been a musician my whole life, and elderly members of my family were starting to suffer hearing loss. So we had a look at how we could simplify a hearing test process. And we set about creating technology that would allow us to do hearing tests in a set of headphones. But along that journey, what we discovered was that we can now understand to really precise and thorough detail how each individual hears in their headphones, and we should use it for more than just a hearing test process. So we left the medical piece aside and focused on enhancing everyone's entertainment and solving problems for people now, while we went to continue that medical journey. And the reason we were really excited about it is because of the increase in the incidence of hearing loss, in particular, self-inflicted or noise-induced hearing loss. And if you jump 2 slides for me, please. Next one's just a disclaimer. Great. So as a society, we've become accustomed to the idea that as you get older, you start to lose your hearing. And what we're talking about is half the population over the age of 75. And as a society, becoming accustomed to that means we become used to the idea that someone can't hear very well, they may or may not need hearing aids, they don't want to get them, it becomes a big issue. The part that really caught our attention, the part that got us passionate about the space, is that hearing loss is not an old person problem. It's a human being problem. Hearing is one of our senses and they're all individual. Everyone's left ear hears differently to their right. Everyone's capacity to hear across their entire frequency spectrum is individualized to them. And as we started digging into this and learning more about it, we became aware of the fact that it's not just half the population over the age of 75. We're talking about 1 in 5 teenagers. And we've actually run some screening programs at schools and discovered this fact for ourselves. And so we decided, let's use a tool to encourage people to take action earlier and pay attention to their hearing loss. And it's given us the opportunity to start helping our primary target, which are the people that are aware that they're suffering a hearing loss, as well as starting to engage with people who are on a health awareness journey and start them earlier in that piece. So we're talking about 4 million people here in Australia, 50 million in the US, 6% of the global population currently suffering from an identifiable hearing loss that is impacting their quality of life. It also allows us to help some targeted groups like returned military veterans, for which hearing loss is the first and second most commonly sought after medical treatment for returned service people. Next slide, please. Our solution is very simple. You have Bluetooth, noise cancelling, high quality headphones that do everything a high quality headphone should do. You put them on, you download the app, you perform a hearing analysis, we show you the result, then we use that result to tailor the sound to meet your individual needs. Once we've profiled your hearing and set it inside the headphone, from that point on, all sound produced by the headphone is tailored to your individual needs. And that unlocks a communication tool, great for video chat, just like the ones I'm using right now for you, TV, phone calls, gaming, listening to your music at high quality, and we take care of it all. They're profiled up for the end user. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the idea of who we're selling our product to. Now, originally, we went directly to the market. We used a crowdfunding campaign called Kickstarter. We sold 100 grand worth on the first day, just shy of $500,000 over our 30-day campaign. And then we set about raising awareness of ourselves as a brand and what our product offering could do. We then earned the right to start supplying Hearing Australia as the government contracted supplier of hearing services here in Australia. So we separate our business model into our end consumer, who's the person who's actually using the product, and then our customers, who are the audiology clinics. So consumers first. Our primary target market, the people we help the most, are those who know they have a hearing loss and they are seeking a solution to that problem. So we've put our product in the place they're seeking that solution, which is in the audiology clinic. The secondary market are people who are health conscious consumers. They're buying our product because of the hearing health awareness element, the safety profile, where they may be mothers of autistic children with NDIS funding. They're coming to us because of the health benefits we can offer from the idea of our health conscious headphones. But when it comes to our primary revenue stream, our customers are audiology clinics. The reason the audiology clinics choose us is because we increase the lifetime value of their customer base. It takes on average 7 years from someone being told they should do something about their hearing to them taking any action about it. So a person has summoned up the courage of being dragged in by the significant other into an audiology clinic, sit down, have a conversation, have a test, walk out empty-handed. We're helping the clinics solve that problem and provide a tool that's going to meet their needs now. So we start the journey early. It's also very important to understand we are not a competitor product to a hearing aid. The capacity of our technology allows us to provide personalization regardless of your hearing ability. So it actually works really well if you have a cochlear implant. If you're already using hearing aids, you can use our headphones over the top, tailor them up, and restore your personalized experience so you're getting the best possible experience. Why we like the clinics, as I said before, they're the place where people are actively seeking a solution to their hearing needs. They're also the gatekeeper of two really important government-funded initiatives when it comes to our revenue stream. At the beginning of 2019, we started being stocked by Hearing Australia on the back of becoming certified under these two schemes. That's the Department of Veterans Affairs Rehabilitations Program and the Hearing Services Program, where you have to see an audiologist to unlock that funding stream. We also became registered with the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which means those on the NDIS can use their funding directly from us. But we like the clinics because it allows us to create quality product, secure contracts with these large international organizations, and then they become our advocate. We have highly qualified audio professionals who are recommending our product to their client base. Next slide, please. Why that's really exciting is that Australia, as in a number of industries, forms a great test bench for these international audiology groups. We have very highly qualified clinicians. We have demographics similar to the US and the UK, which are the biggest audiology markets in the world. And we have that smaller market size, which gives them the confidence to try things out and run trials. We use Amplifon as a great example of this. We're stocked in the Amplifon clinics here in Australia. They recently took over the Attune hearing clinics and the Bupa hearing clinics in the last 12 months. So Amplifon have roughly 450 sites here in Australia, but they've got 11,000 globally. And this is an industry run by 5 key players, all of whom have a strong base here in Australia. And as we form relationships with them here, we can transfer those relationships in a stable and secure growth pipeline to supply internationally. Next slide, please. When it comes to our offering here in Australia, as I spoke to, the DVA Rehabilitations Program, and in our instance, the most beneficial to us are those on DVA Gold cards, the NDIS and the HSP. All of the people in these programs can receive our headphones for zero out-of-pocket expense, which means it's a no-brainer for the clinic to be asking, hey, are you a DVA Gold Card member? You can get benefit from this. Here you go. And we get to provide high-quality product through their network. That's how we scale. That's how we grow. Next slide, please. And this is how we've done it. So we started with Hearing Australia at the beginning of 2019. We then grew that relationship within Hearing Australia and started engaging with some independent clinics. We then bolted on most recently Amplifon, a large international provider here in Australia. And what we see and what we'll be presenting moving forward is the impact of that growth as we start to stack these clinic groups on top of each other. That's how we get the growth. That's how we get the exponential growth, especially as we head internationally. Next slide, please. The metrics that we use to communicate to the market in an understanding of how we're going to grow are the number of clinics stocking our product. These are long-term B2B, well-established relationships that take time to foster, they take time to close, and then they take time to educate, onboard, and establish the selling cycles in these clinics. So while we bring on a clinic number, the revenue stream from those clinics will be seeing over the next 3 to 6 months as they start to educate, onboard, and sell. But since we floated, we continue to grow our clinic numbers, and those numbers grow as we bolt on the remaining clinic groups here in Australia. Next slide, please. We also have established some key beachhead relationships internationally, cornerstoned by Western in the US, who have 16,000 clinics, and a number of others that have been put on ice by COVID that we're looking to rekindle. So that's how we're going to grow. Finish the job here in Australia, and then grow out through those strong partnerships, through our audiology networks internationally. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, James. Got a couple of questions here.
Great.
One's in regards to competitors. There's mention here of, is it Nufira? How are they, how does their product differ from yours?
Yep, so Nuheara are a great product who provide a listening experience for the outside world. They act similar to a hearing aid. They're an in-ear product and they listen to the outside world, whereas our focus is on media and communications through the headphones. So as you can see here on the slides, we offer the headphone and the TV transceiver. We're less concerned with listening to the outside world in a conversational cafe style environment. We focus on the media and entertainment space.
And can you elaborate more on the technology, how you kind of moved from clinics to addressing the secondary market that you described?
Yeah, so our technology is actually the algorithm and the math behind how we are going to adjust the sound based on your individual hearing needs. And that math is put inside readily available chipsets. We essentially strip the guts out of high quality Bluetooth chipsets, and those chipsets can be put in any form factor. So we have the capacity to address multiple markets based on changing the hardware form factor of our product.
And in regards to that, so Bose, who's been here in Australia for a long time, they've just recently shut all their retail stores globally, I believe. What do you have an online focus as a direct to consumer sort of model?
We do, and it will start to grow. As we mentioned in some previous presentations, we've been spending $600 a month on Google AdWords, and NDIS makes up a huge portion of our revenue on direct to consumer. So we do have an e-commerce platform, but the heart and soul of our business is on the audiology clinics. And while Bose is shutting down, audiology clinic numbers are actually growing. And these large groups are buying up more clinics and consolidating their footprint. So it's an interesting clinical area. That's why we stay focused on health and hearing health, because those sectors are actually growing.
And in that regard, a technical question here, how the headphone frequency range is tailored, and can you tell us about the customer experience? Do they need several visits to the facility, or is there a more convenient setup?
So the first initiation of our products, so our first 5,000-6,000 customers, the headphones are sent to them, e-commerce, you come online, buy them, we send them to your house, you download the app and you do it in the comfort of your own living room. So it's a single point activity where you perform the hearing analysis yourself on your app, you see the result, and then you flash the headphone. So you don't need to engage with a clinician to get the outcome. You can do it by yourself at home. The benefit of the clinics is that for those who may not be capable, whether it be lack of smartphone, lack of confidence, intellectual capability, for whatever reason they may be unable to utilize the smartphone themselves, the clinician can actually utilize their existing hearing test to flash and personalize the headphones for that customer base.
Great, that's all we have time for, James. Really appreciate your time, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Great, thanks, Tim.
Okay, next up we have Imugene, ASX code IMU, market cap of $1.6 billion. The company has a one-year return of up 775%. The company is a clinical stage immune oncology company developing a range of new treatments that seek to activate the immune system of cancer patients to identify and eradicate tumours. We have with us the CEO and Managing Director, Leslie Chong. Leslie, thanks for your time. Over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Glad to be here. So I'm happy to speak about our company, Imugene, who, as I think someone spoke, we've gone from 2 cents as early as a few months ago now to 20 cents, to something like 50 cents upwards. So it's great times for Imugene. So next couple of slides, please. Thank you. So a brief introduction to Imugene. Mr. Paul Hopper built Imugene roughly in 2013 with the first iteration of our B-cell immunotherapy from the Medical University of Vienna. I joined the company straight from Genentech in 2015. And then in 2017, we were able to parlay our first B-cell immunotherapies into the clinic that we call Hervax. We like the idea of turning on your own immune system against a particular cancer target. So we licensed in a whole slew of a portfolio from Ohio State University. And in 2019, after Paul Hopper was able to sell Viralytics to Merck, we went on to look for an oncolytic virus, and we ended up with one of the most powerful oncolytic viruses that are out there. And I'll be talking about the clinical design of that shortly. And as early as last month, we were thrilled to announce a new oncolytic virus that can be combined with a powerful drug that's called a CAR-T in combination to abate solid tumors. Next slide, please. So investment highlights, we now have 3 novel technology platforms. We have the B-cell activating immunotherapies, the CF33 oncolytic viral therapy, and now Oncolytics facing the cellular therapies. Our B-cell technologies are already in the clinic, and Hervax with phase 2, we've been able to gather meaningful data for gastric patients. We've completed enrollment into the phase 2. We've already hit the progression-free survival events, and we will hope to bring out the top-line data as early as August. Pd1 Vax, we're currently dose escalating in phase 1 in a non-small cell lung cancer population, and we hope to progress that into other settings here soon. And CF33, our oncolytic viral therapy, we have 2 iterations, and one is currently, I've spoke about this, currently looking to get patients in as early as in the next few months. And then vaccinia, the most powerful virus that we have, we're currently looking at doing a toxicology study to parlay that into the clinic very soon. And as I said, we were able to license in an oncolytic virus that carries a gene that's expressed on the cell surface so that something as powerful as a CAR-T can combine and obliterate solid tumors. Next slide, please. So Oncolytics is an oncolytic virus that has a special gene, a transgene protein that's called CD19. We were able to get a worldwide exclusive license for this novel technology, and we saw compelling preclinical science, even on the cover of Science Translational Medicine. It's peer reviewed, it's heavily tested by scientists, so we're really fortunate to get this molecule, and we hope to parlay this and put this into patients as early as 2022. Next slide, please. So as I said, 3 platforms. So Oncolytics being that CF33, our oncolytic virus with the CD19 flag or expressor, and it will be in a CAR-T or other CD19 directed combination. With CF33, our oncolytic virus, there's 2 iterations. We have CheckVac, that's an ARM virus. It gives a direct payload of a checkpoint inhibitor directly to the cell, and we'll be trialing this in triple-negative breast cancer, and then vaccinia, the parentovirus, the most powerful virus that we have, and I'll go into that a little bit later. B-cell immunotherapy, Hervax in phase 2, just rapidly finishing up the PFS data cleaning. We are looking forward to obtaining the overall survival. It's a double-edged sword, really, because the longer the patients live, the better the data. So we're simply just waiting on some more patients to reach that awful setting of overall survival so that we can cut the data. Pd1 Vax, we have seen some early signs of efficacy and beautiful data to be had. We're currently dose escalating, and what you need to know about phase 1 is it's all about putting as much drug as we can into patients, because we know that it can be much more effective. However, just balancing that toxicology or tox or side effects. And to date, we have not seen any real side effects of concern. So we're dose escalating as high as we can. Next slide, please. As you can see, we have a very full portfolio and pipeline, and we have patents running out as late as 2038, meaning we have a large runway in order to develop this medication, and a pharma company that it will eventually take us over will have a long runway to market these drugs. Next slide, please. So B-cell immunotherapies, I'll just briefly go into this. Next slide. So Monoclonal antibodies are currently marketed. My former company, Genentech, has Herceptin, Avastin. BMS has several different monoclonal antibodies, and they garner anywhere between 8 billion to 20 billion a year in sales. The issue with monoclonal antibody is there's synthetic antibodies that are injected into humans as opposed to our B-cell derived antibodies that are semi-natural. Your body then creates the antibodies against these certain targets. We're able to gather efficacy at this point, given that we've got PFS and our earlier interim data on Hervax, proven our concept or our platform of the B cell showing clear efficacy against the standard of care, which is chemo. I love the usability here. I like the idea of patients being able to come in every 3 to 6 months for a small infusion to just get booster visits, as opposed to sitting every 2 weeks at a cold, hospital room getting a 2-hour infusion on these monoclonal antibodies. The cost of goods is 1/10 of the cost of goods to make our product, which gives a lot of flexibility for a pharma company when they are able to distribute this in the market. Next slide, please. So we're currently in phase 2, finishing up our secondary endpoint, the progression-free survival. We have a lot of safety and tolerability, and we were able to show that there's a whopping immune response, and that's exactly what we had anticipated with this drug, and it's behaving quite nicely. We're just now waiting for that overall survival in order to close this study and gather all the data that we need. Next slide, please. We were able to publish this at the American Association of Cancer Research. It's kind of like the Oscars or the Comic-Con of cancer care, and we were able to show the world that you want, in that Kaplan-Meier curve, that little graph in the middle there, you want to see an early separation of patients living longer, the tumors not growing as fast as the comparator, and we were able to show this with a whopping immune response. Next slide, please. So as I said, all patients had high levels of antibodies with minimal booster visits every 3 months or so. And that Kaplan-Meier curve is a statistical outline, and it shows an early separation, and that's exactly what you want to see. Next slide, please. And Pd1 Vax is an anti-PD1. It's an immune checkpoint inhibitor-like product, but again, it's your B cells creating the antibodies, and we're currently in cohort 3, really interrogating the highest dose, and we've not had any sort of safety issues thus far. We've actually had some patients show up with complete response, meaning they had no residual tumors, so I'm really happy for that patient that have come in and has gained benefit from our drug. Next slide, please. That study is open in 6 centers, 3 centers in Australia and 3 centers in the US. Next slide, please. And our oncolytic virus, so next slide. In the simplest way, our oncolytic virus works to infect solid tumors or malignant cells. Our viruses are designed and engineered to only infect malignant solid tumors. And when it infects the cells, the malignant cells, it multiplies at an accelerated rate. And then your cells, your cancer cells, then implode or explode and gather more viruses to the other infected cells. Next slide, please. And we are thrilled that we are going into triple negative breast cancer because it's one of the deadliest breast cancers, and we are due to start our phase 1. That's that dose escalation, finding that beautiful efficacy versus toxicity and safety profile of our drug in the clinic very soon. I'm hoping that we can have news out as early as a few months from now. Next slide, please. And our most powerful parental virus, this is a very large, ambitious study in where we'll throw it against so many different kinds of solid tumors, including head and neck. We've got advanced melanoma, triple negative breast cancer, lung cancer, bladder, gastric, colorectal, renal. We may even put some pancreatic cancer in there. And what's so great about the study is we're not only looking at it from intratumoral, we're also looking at it from intravenous, which is a easier dosing regimen for clinicians. We'll dose escalate both. As soon as we clear a dose, we will then combine again in that intratumoral and intravenous setting. So we're quite thrilled about this study. And our CAR-T solid tumor challenge. So one of the challenges of the approved CAR-Ts, the CD19 CAR-Ts, is that they're all against blood tumors. So CD19 is expressed in hematologic diseases or blood diseases, blood cancers, and the 4 approved CD19 CAR-Ts only face towards hematologic diseases. The problem here is that solid tumors does not express CD19. So what we have figured out, and the genius people at City of Hope have figured out, is our oncolytic virus can have the CD19's transgene in it, infects only solid tumors, and then raises this particular flag of CD19 such that these powerful CD19 directed CAR-Ts can come and obliterate it. Next slide, please. So as I said, there are 4 approved CD19 CAR-Ts out there, and these are name brand pharma companies like Novartis, Gilead, Kite, and BMS, as you can see. They have, blood cancers are roughly about 10% of tumor types or cancer types, and it works roughly in about 60 to 90% to give a response, meaning these blood cancers can derive something like 60 to 90% curative rates with these drugs. Now, if you can imagine, if we can get solid tumors to react in that way, that'll be revolutionary, and if not, the most significant drug that you could possibly imagine. Next slide, please. Simplest way, our oncolytic virus infects solid cancer cells, shuttles the CD19 flag. When you add a powerful drug like a CAR-T, it just eradicates cancer cells, and especially in solid tumors. Next slide, please. Patents going out to, again, 2038. Next slide. And we have significant milestones. These are just a few, and I put 12 to 24 months, but really in the next few months, you should see some significant milestone news up and coming. Next slide. And I believe our share price, a few days ago was at 32.5 cents. It might be a little bit higher today. And I'm happy to report that Paul Hopper and myself are in the top 5 holders of the company. And I believe that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Leslie. You had a lot to get through there. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tim.
In regards to your buying and Paul Hopper's buying, and you've obviously got a very large retail shareholder base, very loyal retail shareholder base. What do you have to do to attract institutions onto the register?
I think it's, for me, it's all about the science. If you lead with the science, the value will build. And that's exactly what's happened here. And that will be a continuation of what I plan to do.
And you recently made a new appointment, Dr. Monil Shah. He's clearly joined in a business capacity rather than a clinical one. Does that point to partnerships as part of the road forward? Look,
it's market sensitive, in regards to partnership. However, Dr. Monil Shah comes with significant amount of cellular therapy experience, and he is friends with everyone in the farm. He's so well connected. We are thrilled to have him. And is it possible, there's lots of questions, lots of technical questions here on PD1. Can you give us a little bit more of an update there? We're currently looking at phase cohort 3, which is our highest dose. And I think this is where we'll see a significant amount of activity and data. And so that's exactly what a phase 1, is all about, getting that dose to move forward with, and we're hurriedly trying to get that data. But we want to be very selective about the patient population we want to go into, which is lung cancer. So we've had some patients that have failed other lines of therapy and have come on ours and reap benefits. So we want to continue that on. So we're being highly selective about the patients that we put in our cohort 3. And does that mean there's a question here specifically, does that mean you've dosed all the patients in cohort 3 yet? No, so they're currently in screening. So as I've said, we're being really selective about how we choose our patients, because we want to reap the most amount of data that we can so we can move forward with other combination and other studies.
Great, Leslie. That's all we have time for. We have a lot of questions, so I will shoot those through to you next week and appreciate your Friday time. Great, thank you. Next up, we have BrainChip, ASX code BRN, market cap of 930 million with a one-year return of up 471%. The company is a global technology company that is revolutionizing edge AI applications with their event domain neural processor and comprehensive development environment. We have with us the founder and CEO, Peter van der Made. Peter, thank you for your time. Over to you.
Yes, if you have the first slide up, I believe. We can skip over this one. That's the forward-looking statement. What we're seeing in the market is that, like before with the computer industry, if you look at the 1970s, people were moving from using a mainframe computer to processing at the edge, in that we had a processor in our laptops and computers, and desktops, etc. That same process is happening in artificial intelligence. At the moment, you see people using large data centers, things like Alexa. They upload everything up to the large data center, where it is then processed, and the results are sent back to the device. That's causing bandwidth problems with millions of units. We see that the number of units will increase very rapidly over the next 5 years. So they moved data centers closer to the edge. These are still, while the central data center burned billions of watts, the edge data centers are still using millions of watts. The next step was to move go to the edge of the cloud. So devices that process and upload things to the cloud in a more decent manner. And what we are seeing now is that people are moving farther from the cloud. And what we are aiming at is the Akida chip, is the advanced far edge, where and the connection to the internet is not necessary at all. Beneficial AI is an important part of our mission. The machines we are looking at is like medical applications, breath analyzers for COVID, for instance, sensory perception of all kinds, and we can do this at a very high speed and at extremely low power consumptions. So next slide, please. We see that the number of connections that are making use of the internet, if you project forward what is happening today in 2021, you see that there is about 11 billion devices connected to the internet, and 23 billion or 10 billion individual users. Now, you see an escalation of that in the next 5 years, that over 40 billion connections to the internet will cause bandwidth problems that can be averted by using the Akida chip. The Akida chip does all the processing on the device, on the edge, doesn't need an internet connection, runs at low power, and is extremely small and light. So we go to the next slide, please. So we currently have the Akida chip in production. The first production chips will arrive at the end of August and will be delivered to customers by the end of this year. We have 4 paths to revenue. That's the first one is to sell IP. We have 1 IP license at the moment, where IP is delivered as a black box. It is encrypted. It's dropped onto a customer's chip, and they connect it up to that bus, and they can use it as if it's a chip. The second path is of course chip sales. We also do module sales, which is where we're expecting our first revenue. And the fourth path to revenue is the royalties we are receiving after an IP sale. So after the customer has integrated the IP on their own chip, they will have to go through a period of development and testing, And once they integrate the product release the product and start manufacturing the product, they will start paying royalties to BrainChip. So the sort of products that we see that BrainChip is going to be used in is, for instance, in cars, not only in self-driving cars, but also to improve the driver experience. Looking back at the driver, for instance, to identify the driver, to also adjust the environment of the car to the driver's preferences, and to see if the driver is authorized to drive this car. We can also listen to the engine and give the driver feedback on preventative maintenance. Self-driving cars, of course, we do a project with LiDAR to identify objects in 3D space. Home appliances, a very important market. We envision, for instance, a fridge that is equipped with Akida to do the analysis, and an odor sensor that will be able to detect if any food is off in the fridge and what it is. Electronic doorbells, there is really thousands of applications. Next slide, please. So if we're looking at the overview of the competitive market, the BrainChip Akida 1000 is our current chip. The other two chips in the same sort of technology space are the IBM True North chip. The IBM True North chip is huge. It's far larger than the Akida chip. It supports 1 million neurons. We support 1.2 million neurons. The True North chip does not have on-chip learning. It is not compatible with the standard sort of programming language that everybody is using, or programming environment, which is TensorFlow and Python. You have to learn a new language to use the True North chip. It cannot stand alone because it does not have a processing core, and it does not have on-chip convolution, which means that existing CNN networks that people have already invested money in cannot run on the IBM True North, but can run on the Akida chip. And we have proven that. So the Intel Low-E chip is also in the same space. It's also a neuromorphic chip. Their on-chip learning capability is programmable, so you have to write your own program to get it to learn. The environment is the neural engineering framework, which is again a new environment, a new language to learn. It doesn't do standalone, and it doesn't have on-chip convolution. So then there is a whole range of other what you would call co-processors, such as the Coral TPU and the NVIDIA chip. These are all what I would class together as deep learning accelerators. The deep learning accelerators are compatible with TensorFlow because TensorFlow was designed for these things. But they are burning up to 1,000 times more power than the Akida chip. They are math chips, which means that they only accelerate the math for a neural network. So your neural network still runs on your CPU. And they do not have a standalone. They need to work with a CPU, and there is no convolution. You need to run convolution on your CPU. So the only chip that it is checking all the boxes for edge devices is the Akida 1000 chip, which we will be releasing very soon. We already have done engineering samples, so the design of a chip is largely de-risked. The engineering samples work very well, so that's why we moved forward into production. Next slide, please. So I touched a little bit on the applications. Security is an obvious one. Not only can we build this technology into cameras, and then the cameras don't need to transmit images back to the large computer. All they need to transmit is whether a security breach has occurred. All the processing is done on Akida. Person recognition is something we do very well. In healthcare, we have done a project with a company in Israel. They make a sensor for different types of cancer, as well as COVID-19. They have shipped us the data sets of clinical trials they have done we have been able to identify COVID-19, for instance, with an accuracy of mid-90s, about 95%, which is better than the PCR test. This is a test that is just needs a sample of exhaled breath. Smart cities, for instance, pollution. Looking at levels of pollution, not only levels of pollution, but also what type of pollution, so we can classify the different chemicals that are in the air. In manufacturing, autonomous machines, and of course in automotive, which I already talked about. Next slide, please. So if we explode these things, you see that, for instance, in healthcare, you see that diagnosis, virtual nurses where patients are being monitored all the time, but also fraud detection, vibration analysis, for instance, for bearings. There is really thousands of applications where devices are not just smart, but intelligent. Next slide, please. If we're looking at the market size for this type of technology, this chart is a little bit skewed because the researchers looked at the current situation and projected that forward. And of course, we are going to cause a shift in these colors, in these bars, but not the size of the bars. So if we're looking at a $60 billion market in 2025, I believe that is correct. We are aiming to get a significant part of that market with the Akida 1000 and also the next generations of Akida. Next slide, please. So here we, against the background of a large data center, the Akida chip is doing the same job in edge devices, but at the extremely low power consumption, as low as 100 microwatts, which means that you can run off a small penlight battery for 5 months. We have on-chip very fast learning, so you can just show it an animal, for instance, toy animal, and put it in front of the camera, and it will recognize that toy animal, then also in the wild. We have on-chip convolution, which means we're compatible with existing networks and also compatible with TensorFlow. We have very low heat generation because the chip is running on very low power, and it's small and lightweight, which is important in spacecraft and aircraft, airborne equipment. Next slide, please. Recently, we have been added to the ASX 300 index, but also we did an upgrade to our US listing on the OTC. We are now listed at the highest level, which is the QX listing. We are currently searching for a new CEO, a CEO who is a superstar, somebody who is coming from a large organization, who has experience in building a company from where we are today, at this pivot point where we are moving from research and development now into production and sales. So we're currently reviewing a short list of candidates, and that is going very well. We're also opening the door to institutional investors, and I just finished a roadshow in Sydney and by Zoom in Melbourne to get institutions interested in the brain chip technology. We also appointed a new investor relations, which will result in better investor relations coverage in the near future, or at present. Okay, we go to the next slide, please. That was my presentation. I did it in 7 minutes. That's
great, Per, because we have a lot of questions.
Oh, good.
As someone just asked, you did an institutional roadshow. What was their line of questioning for the company?
Really, they understand the need for a larger institutional participation in our share base. The only questions really that came back is the composition of our board, because our only female member resigned for personal reasons just before the AGM, and they were concerned about the diversity of the board. For the rest, BrainChip is very compliant and very responsive, so there was very few other questions.
And what about the commercial opportunity, the revenue? Where do you start? I would have thought the institutions would ask about that.
Well, we already have a small revenue this year. We have seen that Renaissance, for instance, have paid up their license. Royalties will flow from that within the next couple of years when they have their products ready. We also have a number of early access customers who have our engineering sample chips and are experimenting with those chips now to see how they can design them into their systems. We will follow that up with production chips very soon. So we've seen some revenue flowing at the beginning of this year. We are expanding our sales team, and we also expect to appoint a number of design partners and solution partners.
I have lots of questions here. So Elon Musk recently raised the issue of environmental sustainability in terms of cryptocurrency processing. It uses a lot of energy.
Yes.
Will technology like your chips significantly reduce the energy used for these processes?
Yes, if you're looking at a data center like AWS, it uses enormous amounts of power. They're very secretive about how much power they're actually using. I've been trawling the internet to see what sort of figures I can find. They said something about 1 billion units would use 1 billion watts. So if you look at the Akida chip running at somewhere between 100 to 300 100 microwatt to 300 milliwatt, we would make at an average a 97% savings of energy for the same result.
Okay, and so how does your product stack up against a company like Axe and some of the other competitors out there?
Yeah, I had a slide there with the competitors, the main competitors in it. A lot of people are building chips for data centers. That's where the immediate cash has been in the past 5 years. In the next 5 years, you see a shift happening away from the data centers into edge devices, just like it has happened in computers back in the 1970s. That shift is enabled by the Akida chip. So that's where we're expecting to see a revenue.
And there's been a significant shortage of chip manufacturing capacity out of China, particularly in automobiles. Is that affected BrainChip's ability to deliver?
Not at all. We have an excellent relationship with Socionext in Japan. Socionext is the second largest manufacturer of chips in the world. It's Fujitsu. So the production slots for Akida have been booked. So we do not expect to see any delays in deliveries.
Okay, great, Peter. That is all we have time for. I really appreciate your time on this Friday. I have a lot of questions to send through to you, and we'll catch up next week. We'll create some further content. Now, all these videos, all these webinar videos will be available next week to share. Thanks again, Peter.
Thanks, Tim.